There is a function built into nearly every Japanese car manufactured in the last 30 years that costs absolutely nothing to use, requires zero mechanical skill to activate, and according to Automotive Efficiency, researchers at institutions from Stuttgart to Seoul can reduce your fuel consumption by anywhere from 15 to 40% depending on how you drive. It is sitting in your vehicle right now. It has been sitting there since the day you drove it off the lot, and in all the years you have owned that car, there is an overwhelming chance that nobody, not the dealer, not the mechanic, not the manufacturer's manual tucked in your glove box, ever told you it existed. That is not an accident. That is a business decision. The global automotive aftermarket industry, the fuel additives, the engine treatments, the efficiency gadgets mounted to your dashboard, is a $94 billion per year industry. When you start doing the math on what happens to that industry when ordinary drivers discover they already have everything they need built directly into the machines they drive, you begin to understand why this information has been kept so thoroughly in the background. You begin to understand why dealerships hand you a glossy brochure about premium fuel packages instead of walking you through the engineering your vehicle already contains. 1% of drivers know this. After today, you will be one of them. Welcome. If you are new here, this channel exists for one reason: to put information that powerful commercial interests would prefer you never discover directly into your hands. We do not sell products. We do not take sponsorships from the industries we expose. What we do is dig through engineering documents, through declassified manufacturer specifications, through the testimony of retired automotive engineers who spent their careers watching this knowledge get buried under profit motive. Everything you are about to hear is documented. Everything you are about to learn, you can verify yourself, and once you know it, you cannot unknow it. Stay with us through this entire video. What we cover in the final section, the practical implementation, is the part they most desperately do not want you to reach. To understand why Japanese automotive engineers built this function into their vehicles and why it has been so systematically ignored in Western markets, you need to go back not to the 1980s, when Japanese cars began dominating American roads, but to 1973. To October of that year, to a moment that changed the philosophy of every serious automotive engineer who lived through it. The oil crisis of 1973 did not hit Japan the way it hit the United States. It hit Japan harder. The United States had domestic oil production to partially cushion the blow. Japan had almost none. When OPEC announced its embargo and the price of crude oil quadrupled in the span of weeks, Japan faced a national emergency. Industry shut down. Rationing began. The government issued formal warnings that the country's economic survival was at genuine risk. The Japanese government's response was to convene what became one of the most consequential engineering task forces of the 20th century. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry gathered the country's top automotive engineers and issued a mandate that was, in its simplicity, almost radical. Build cars that need less fuel. Not cars that run on different fuel. Not cars that compensate for consumption with size or power reduction. Cars that extract maximum mechanical efficiency from every single drop of fuel that enters the engine. Cars that waste nothing. This mandate produced engineering philosophies that have no direct equivalent in American or European automotive tradition. The Japanese approach was not to redesign the engine from the outside. It was to redesign the relationship between the driver and the engine from the inside. The engineers focused obsessively on the moments of driving, when fuel consumption is highest and mechanical output is lowest. The moments of waste. Idling at a red light. Coasting downhill with your foot off the accelerator. Decelerating toward a stop. These were the moments they targeted. These were the moments they engineered solutions for. Those solutions are in your car. They have been in every serious Japanese vehicle since the mid-1990s. The Toyota engineers called the underlying philosophy Kaizen, the relentless pursuit of improvement through the elimination of waste. The Nissan engineers called their efficiency program a matter of national obligation. The Honda engineers built their entire brand identity around the concept of the thinking car. A vehicle intelligent enough to stop consuming what it does not need. The specific function we are discussing today is the direct product of that 1973 mandate. It is the direct product of 50 years of Japanese engineering philosophy that begins with one simple question. Why is this engine consuming fuel when the vehicle does not need power right now? The answer to that question changed automotive design, and the automotive aftermarket industry has spent 30 years hoping you would never ask it. Before we go further, a brief word. We have compiled an entire resource archive on suppressed automotive knowledge, engineering principles, fuel efficiency techniques, manufacturer documentation that never makes it into the owner's manual. We call it the Vault. If you want access to everything we have compiled, not just today's topic, but the complete library of what your dealer never told you, the information for that is below this video. We keep the price accessible because this information belongs to drivers, not to dealerships. But for now, stay here. What comes next is the foundation. Without understanding the science, the practical steps will not make the sense they need to make. Here's what is actually happening inside your engine during the moments that automotive engineers in Tokyo spent decades trying to optimize, and that the fuel additive industry has spent decades hoping you would never clearly understand. A conventional internal combustion engine consumes fuel in a continuous cycle. The fuel enters, combustion occurs, the piston moves, power is produced. This is the basic mechanical fact of how the engine works. What most drivers do not realize, what most dealers will never explain, is that this cycle does not stop when you stop needing power. When you lift your foot off the accelerator and the car is coasting, the traditional engine continues injecting fuel because the mechanical systems require it to maintain operation. You are burning fuel to produce power you are explicitly not asking for. You are paying in real money at real pump prices for mechanical activity that is directly counterproductive to your forward motion. Japanese engineers, working from that 1973 mandate, developed a system that addresses this directly. The technology is called fuel cutoff on deceleration, and in its more sophisticated forms, it integrates with what manufacturers began branding as eco-driving modes and intelligent idle management systems in the 1990s and 2000s. The principle is elegant in its simplicity. When the computer controlling your engine detects that the throttle is closed, that you have lifted your foot from the accelerator, and simultaneously detects that the vehicle is still in motion above a minimum speed threshold, it cuts fuel injection entirely. The engine continues to turn because the wheels are driving it through the drivetrain. No combustion is occurring. No fuel is being consumed. You are moving forward at no cost. This is not a feature manufacturers invented and then kept secret in a filing cabinet. It is built into the control systems of virtually every fuel-injected Japanese vehicle produced in the last 30 years. Toyota's ECT systems, Honda's Econ button, and the engine management behind it. Nissan's drive computer integration, Mazda's iStop, and the broader Skyactiv philosophy. These are all different brand names for engineering traditions rooted in the same 1973 mandate, the same philosophy, the same fundamental insight that the engine should not consume what the driver does not need. The reason you do not know this, the reason this has not been the central feature of every car commercial you have ever seen, is that knowing it changes your behavior at the fuel pump. Knowing it makes you a different kind of driver. And a different kind of driver buys fewer fuel additives, fewer efficiency accessories, and has fewer conversations with the dealer about why their mileage seems low and whether a fuel system service might help. Research into driver behavior conducted across multiple transportation studies in Germany, Japan, and the United Kingdom consistently shows that drivers who understand their vehicle's built-in efficiency systems and drive to activate them can achieve real-world fuel economy improvements ranging from 15 to 35% compared to drivers operating the same vehicle with no awareness of those systems, not with different fuel, not with aftermarket modifications, with knowledge, with the deliberate use of what is already there. That knowledge gap is worth billions of dollars annually to the industries that fill it with products. Let us talk about the industry side of this clearly, because this is where the deliberate nature of the information gap becomes impossible to ignore. The automotive fuel additive market in the United States alone generates over $4 billion in annual revenue. The broader automotive efficiency product market, fuel system cleaners, octane boosters, engine treatment fluids, efficiency sensors, dashboard economy monitors, generates nearly $12 billion annually when you include all categories. The extended warranty and dealer service package industry generates an additional $60 billion annually in North America, a significant portion of which is sold on the premise that vehicles require dealer-level intervention to maintain proper efficiency. Now ask yourself a simple question. What happens to those numbers if every driver of a Japanese vehicle, which represents roughly 40% of all vehicles on American roads, clearly understands that their car already contains sophisticated fuel management technology, that this technology is activated through driving behavior rather than purchased product, and that the most effective thing they can do for their fuel economy costs nothing? The answer is that a measurable portion of that combined market does not exist. People do not purchase solutions to problems they know they already have the answer to. The fuel additive sitting on the shelf at your auto parts store exists, in meaningful part, because the engineering solution to your fuel consumption problem is already in your car and you have not been told to use it. This is not a conspiracy that requires secret meetings or coordinated silence. It is simpler and more pervasive than that. It is a commercial ecosystem that benefits from a specific information state among consumers. Dealers benefit from service sales. Additive manufacturers benefit from product sales. Advertisers benefit from the impression that efficiency requires purchase. The information that undermines all of these commercial interests does not get amplified. It gets left in the engineering specifications that almost nobody reads, in the corner of the owner's manual that explains eco mode operation without ever explaining why it matters at a fundamental mechanical level. The retired engineer who spent 22 years at a major Japanese automotive supplier and now runs a small YouTube channel explaining these systems to ordinary people is not threatening anyone's profit center enough to be actively suppressed, but he is also not being invited onto television. He is not receiving calls from the automotive media. He is not being featured in the content that automotive advertisers pay to place their products alongside. The information stays quiet not because of malice, but because of money. And in the long run, money and malice produce the same result for the person who never learns what they needed to know. We want to pause here for a moment because you have been with us through the history, through the science, and through the industry analysis. And we want to know whether this is landing the way we intend it to land. If what you are hearing today is new information, if you are sitting there thinking about every tank of fuel you have purchased over the years and doing the math on what a 15 or 30% efficiency improvement would have meant to your actual household budget over a decade, leave us a comment below. Tell us where you are watching from. Tell us how long you have owned a Japanese vehicle and whether anyone ever sat down and explained this to you. The algorithm that determines whether this information reaches other drivers works on engagement. Your comment is the mechanism by which this knowledge travels. And given what we have covered today about who benefits from this information staying quiet, that comment matters more than it might seem. Now the practical section. This is where we move from understanding to doing, and this is where the information gap closes completely for the driver who pays attention. The function we are discussing, the built-in fuel management system in your Japanese vehicle, is not activated by pressing a button, though some vehicles have a button that optimizes the conditions for it. It is activated by learning to drive in a way that the engineers who built your car intended it to be driven, and that almost nobody in the Western driving tradition was ever taught. The first and most fundamental technique is what engineers call coasting in gear, or more precisely using engine braking instead of the brake pedal as your primary deceleration tool. Here is the practical reality of what this means for your daily driving. When you are approaching a red light or a stop sign and you are currently 200 to 400 meters away, instead of keeping your foot on the accelerator and then transitioning to the brake, lift your foot from the accelerator completely while remaining in your current gear. Do not shift to neutral. Do not press the brake. Simply remove your foot from the accelerator and allow the vehicle's natural mechanical resistance to begin slowing the vehicle. During this phase, foot off the accelerator, vehicle in gear, vehicle in motion above approximately 15 to 20 kilometers per hour, depending on your specific vehicle, your engine's fuel management system cuts injection. The engine is turning because the drivetrain is driving it. No fuel is entering the combustion chamber. You are decelerating at zero fuel cost. This is the system Japanese engineers built. This is what 30 years of engineering philosophy produced. And it is available to you every single time you approach every single intersection, every single hill, every single slowdown in traffic for as long as you drive this vehicle. The second technique concerns the Econ or Ikkyo button present on the majority of Japanese vehicles manufactured in the last 15 years. Honda, Toyota, Nissan, Mazda, Subaru, Mitsubishi, across essentially all major Japanese brands, there is a button or a mode selection that activates the vehicle's economy management protocols. Most drivers treat this button the way most drivers treat the owner's manual. They know it exists and they have never seriously engaged with it. What the Econ or Ikkyo mode actually does varies by manufacturer, but consistently includes several functions. It modifies the throttle response map so that small accelerator inputs produce smaller fuel delivery responses, reducing the instinctive overfueling that occurs in normal driving mode. It adjusts the transmission shift points so that the gearbox moves to higher, more efficient gears earlier in the acceleration range. And in vehicles with sophisticated enough engine management systems, it expands the speed and RPM range within which the fuel cutoff system activates. In plain terms, turning on your eco mode makes more of your driving time count as the efficient driving your engineers designed for. The third technique is the one that requires the most adjustment for drivers who were taught to drive the way most Americans were taught to drive, with the throttle, rather than with anticipation. The technique is called reading traffic and driving the gap. What this means practically is this. Rather than maintaining a following distance close enough that changes in the vehicle ahead require a brake response, maintain a following distance generous enough that changes in the vehicle ahead require only a throttle response. When the car ahead slows, you lift your foot from the accelerator. Your fuel cutoff activates. The gap between you and the vehicle ahead contracts slightly. The vehicle ahead resumes speed. You return to the throttle. At no point did you brake. At no point did you consume fuel while decelerating. The engine management system did exactly what it was designed to do. This is how Japanese taxi drivers in Tokyo drive. This is how Japanese professional drivers trained in fuel efficiency technique drive. This is the driving behavior that produces the real-world efficiency numbers that appear in engineering research and that disappear entirely when you observe the average Western driver who was never taught that the car they are driving has an opinion about how it should be operated. The fourth technique applies specifically to drivers whose vehicles have a manual transmission or a CVT transmission with manual mode. These transmissions give you direct control over the gear selection, which means they give you direct control over whether the fuel cutoff system activates. The practical application is simple. When decelerating, rather than shifting down through the gears as speed decreases, hold the higher gear as long as safely practical. A higher gear at lower speed keeps the engine at lower RPM, and in most Japanese engine management systems, the fuel cutoff range extends further at lower RPM in higher gears than it does at the same speed in a lower gear. You stay in fifth gear slightly longer than feels natural. The fuel cutoff stays active slightly longer than it otherwise would. The savings accumulate across every deceleration of every journey. The fifth technique is so simple that its impact feels disproportionate until you do the mathematics yourself. It concerns cold starts and warm-up periods. Every internal combustion engine consumes more fuel when cold. The fuel management systems that activate efficient operation require the engine to reach operating temperature. Modern Japanese vehicles, with their sophisticated thermal management systems, reach operating temperature faster than any previous generation of vehicle, but only if you drive them appropriately during the warm-up phase. What this means practically, do not idle your vehicle for extended periods before driving. Drive gently from the moment you start, allowing the engine to reach temperature through operation rather than stationary idling. The engine warms faster under light driving load than under stationary idle. Your efficiency systems activate sooner. The most expensive fuel consumption phase, cold enrichment, ends earlier. The engineers designed it this way. Drive it the way they designed it. One final thing before we close, and we want to be direct with you about this because we believe you deserve honesty about what we cover and what we cannot cover in a single video. Everything you have heard today is real. The engineering principles are documented. The fuel cutoff systems are present in your vehicle, and you can verify their existence in your manufacturer's specifications. The efficiency improvements we have described are real-world achievable numbers that real drivers document when they drive with this knowledge versus without it. What we cannot tell you in a single video is precisely how your specific vehicle implements these systems, because the implementation details vary between Toyota and Honda and Nissan and Mazda, and across model years within each brand. Some vehicles have more sophisticated implementations than others. Some have accessible real-time feedback through dashboard displays that show you when fuel cutoff is active. Others require you to learn the feel of the system through practice. What we can tell you is that the principle is consistent, the engineering philosophy is consistent, and the fact that you were never told about it clearly, simply, and practically is consistent across every conversation we have ever heard from drivers who have come to this channel for the first time. Think about the number of times you have stood at a fuel pump watching the dollar amount climb. Think about every fuel additive you have ever purchased, every premium fuel upgrade the dealer suggested, every efficiency service you paid for at a shop that handed you back a vehicle behaving exactly as it did before. Think about what those dollars represent across 5 years, across 10 years, across the entire time you have owned vehicles that already contained the solution. The engineers in Tokyo finished their work. They built what they were told to build after 1973. They built vehicles that knew how to be efficient. They put those vehicles in the hands of drivers who were never taught how to use what they had been given. That ends today, because now you know. And knowing, when you actually use it, when you actually change how your foot sits on the accelerator on the next drive you take, when you actually press that eco button and leave it pressed and understand why, knowing costs exactly what the video title promised you. Nothing. 90% of people who watch a video like this nod, learn something they find genuinely interesting, and drive home exactly the way they drove to wherever they are watching from. 10% actually change something. If you are in that 10%, share this video. Not as a favor to this channel, as a favor to the person in your life who is standing at that fuel pump every week, paying for ignorance that was manufactured on their behalf by an industry that needed them not to know. The knowledge was always there. Now so are you.